this lesson, we're going to find the least common multiple of two numbers. Then we're going to use that skill to learn how to find the least common denominator when we're given two fractions. This skill is something we will be using and applying to comparing fractions, to adding and subtracting fractions when they don't have the same denominator. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by looking at what is the least common multiple, the LCM of a number. So least means the lowest, common means the same, multiple means product of a number. So if we're finding the LCM, or the least common multiple, we're trying to find the lowest common or same product of both numbers. So let's go ahead and do a couple examples. So we're going to set up on our paper this chart. When we work with fractions, this number up here becomes your factor of change that you'll be using for both the numerator and denominator. So it's a very important step to put into your chart. It'll help you later. Don't skip it. So let's go ahead and find the LCM of 3 and 2. So we have 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 2 is 2. We don't have the same yet. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. They don't have 1 in common yet. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, check that out. We do have a match. So I'm going to circle my match. It's almost like a game when you do this, where you're trying to find the first match you can in your list. So now what we have is we know the LCM, or the least common multiple, of 2 and 3 is 6. So we're going to do another example. Let's do the numbers 4 and 12. So we set up our chart. This is how we factor. How we're finding our multiples, we do 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 12 is 12. So far they don't have anything in common. 4 and 12 don't match. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 12 is 24. I still do not have a match. 3 times 4 is 12. Stop, I've got a match. I don't even have to do 3 times 12 because I can already see I have found the very first match. Because remember, we're going for the lowest. Well, I know 3 times 12 is going to be more than 12. So I can stop right here because I now know the LCM, or the least common multiple, of 4 and 12 is going to be 12. Now remember, this is going to be very important when we come to fractions because these are going to be my factor of changes. And we're going to look at that in the second half of today's lesson. If we look back at our first example, our factor of changes are going to be 2 and 3. So that part becomes very important in our chart for the next lesson, or the next part of this lesson. So let's find the least common multiple of 7 and 8. So I do 1 times 7 is 7. 1 times 8 is 8. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 8 is 16. No matches yet. 3 times 7 is 21. 3 times 8 is 24. No matches yet. 4 times 7 is 28. 4 times 8 is 32. No matches yet. 7 times 5 is 35. 5 times 8 is 40. No matches yet. 6 times 7 is 42. 6 times 8 is 48. No matches yet. 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 8 is 56. No matches yet. 8 times 7 is 56. Stop. I'm done. I've got a match. I have 56 and 56. So the LCM, the least common multiple of 7 and 8, is 56. Now remember, in this multiples chart, this part is important because in my next lesson, I'm going to refer to times 7 as my factor of change, and I'm also going to refer to times 8 as my factor of change. So by now, hopefully you're saying, what do you mean factor of change? Let's take a look at that. So when we are going to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, or we're going to compare fractions with unlike denominators, what we're going to want to do is we want to make those denominators match. How do we do that? We find the least common denominator, or the LCD. So check that out. You see the LC is in common. Well, denominator is just the specific situation that you're using the least common multiple. So what you're doing here is using the skill of finding the LCM of your denominators. And that's what your LCD is. So let's go ahead and take a look at two different examples using our multiples charts from above. So here I have, let's go ahead and use a 4th grade skill of comparing, because you're going to be watching a video coming up of adding and subtracting these, but we haven't watched that yet. However, in 4th grade, you did compare fractions with different denominators. So let's use the least common denominator. Now go up to our chart here. Our least common denominator was 56. So that means I'm going to have to change this fraction and this fraction to have the denominator of 56, because my LCD of these two fractions, this denominator and this denominator, is 56. So now is where the factor of change comes in, really important. Whatever I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator, because we're creating an equivalent fraction of 2/7 to some amount of 56. I've basically broken these sevenths into much smaller parts. So how did I get from 7 to 56? Well, if I come up here, it was my factor of change. I multiplied by 8. So if I multiplied the denominator times 8, I must also multiply my numerator times 8, because that's my factor of change. So 2 times 8 is 16. Now we look at the other fraction. I need to make 3/8 an equivalent fraction to some amount of 56. So what I see here is I took the eighths and broke them into very small pieces. But how did I do that is my factor of change. So I come up here and I see my factor of change. Here's my 8. There's 56. There's my factor of change. So it's times 7. Now, whatever I do to the denominator, I must do to the numerator, because we want to keep those fractions, these two fractions right here, equivalent. So 3 times 7 is 21. So if we look at it in another way to help you make sense of why we did the same thing to the numerator and denominator, is 7/7 is 1. So if we look at this right here, it's like multiplying 3/8 times 1. So we can see we're not going to change the value. Now, when we go to compare these two fractions, we would be looking at the numerators. The denominators match. That means those two have the same size pieces. And if I look at 16 and I look at 21, 16 is less than 21. So 1656, I have less pieces than if I had 2156. So 2/7 is less than 3/8. Let's look at another example. We have 3/4 and we have 5/12, and I want to compare them. So I know they're both more than half, so I can't use benchmark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make common denominators. So to make common denominators, I need to find the LCD. So I have the denominator of 4, and I have the denominator of 12. And I want to find out what my LCD. So I use the scale of LCM. That is what we did right here in this example. So I'm going to find the LCM of 4 and 12. The LCM is going to be my LCD. So 12 is the least common denominator. That means I do not have to change this fraction because the denominator of this fraction is already 12. I only have to find an equivalent fraction to 3/4 with a denominator of 12. So I'm going to break those 4 into smaller pieces to get 12s. Now let's go look at our factor of change. How did we change that? So here we have 4. I go over to 12. I did that by multiplying by 3. So if I multiply my denominator times 3, I also have to multiply my numerator times 3. And 3 times 3 is 9. Because remember, 3/3 is 1 whole. So in my little thought bubble up here, I want you to be thinking I multiplied it by 1 because 1 is equal to 3/3. So now I can compare 9/12 to 5/12. So 9 is more pieces than 5. 12 tells me they're all the same size. So 9/12 is greater than 5/12. So that means 3/4 is greater than 5/12.